Shelby Oaks. Shelby Oaks. Shelby Oaks. Right. Full disclosure, and to perhaps explain some of the tone in this video, I am in the final planning stages of my first ever self-funded full-length movie for my subscribers. Over the last year and a half, I have kicked my own ass. I have saved every literal penny I've made with YouTube. I've sold every piece of gear I'm not using, regardless of sentimental attachment. I've even skipped friggin' meals because, as cliche as it sounds, I have wanted to make my own movies since I was a kid. And I'm finally in a place I have the time and energy and focus a movie deserves. People in my position have dreams where they're handed millions of dollars and told to go nuts. And in that dream, a big movie distribution company rep taps you on the shoulder and asks you what you need to make your movie happen. And after they've given you that, and you've completely fucked everything up because of course you did, they give you even more. And if it's a particularly good dream, one of the greatest writers ever taps your other shoulder and asks if you can pitch in. And if it's a super duper dream, Sydney Sweeney texts right before you wake up to ask if you want her to DP. I can't imagine the kick-ass horror movie I would bring to the world if that kind of dream came true for me, because that kind of dream does not come true for people. Most of the time. YouTube's biggest movie review channel by subscriber count just lived that exact dream, minus the Sydney Sweeney DP bit. Having said that, he was handed millions of dollars. Maybe he bought that too. He's been doing it for years. He has over 2 million subscribers, and he makes thousands and thousands of dollars a month reviewing movies.
I am not about bashing filmmakers, artists. I know how hard it is to make a movie.
He also has a catchphrase. He also owns several t-shirts confirming his status as a filmmaker, and so obviously his next logical step should be to make his own movie, shouldn't it? With an unlimited budget relative to independent filmmakers, and with a support system of an established beloved filmmaker, with his imagination being his only limitation, here's what Chris Stuckmann did with the opportunity of a lifetime. When the movie starts, it is a found footage, and it immediately surpasses our expectations by boldly and originally looking almost exactly like the most famous scene from the most famous found footage movie ever made, featuring the godmother of found footage herself, Heather Donahue.
I'm so sorry.
This is the last known footage of Riley, who is this movie's equivalent of the shiny thing in the Pulp Fiction briefcase. We are told Riley disappeared without a trace, despite the fact there wouldn't be a film if there was no trace of her disappearance. Instead of kicking things off with some creepy contrast by having the soon-to-be missing girl happy and go-lucky and clueless about her impending abduction, we're shown her actual abduction, and we're told she's scared. And with show don't tell being one of the foundational tenets of good writing, whoever wrote this is giving convention and good practice a big fat middle finger from the opening scene. And while we're processing what's already been spelled out for us, we're given more information that cranks things up another notch. After blowing half their budget flying a dozen of YouTube's most influential movie reviewers to the Shelby Oaks premieres, they could only afford a size 4 font. This adds an element of mystery to the movie, as most adults won't be able to read the text. It's also simultaneously utterly terrifying if you happen to mistake the font for a deep, nasty gouge across your screen the way I did. Then we learn Riley's sister Mia has been searching for Riley for 12 years, and she wants us to know her sister the way she knows her. This exposition goes a long way towards explaining why Mia never smiles in this movie. Because if I grew up with a sibling in the next room singing like Riley, not only would I have trouble smiling for free, I'd probably have quit searching for her after the 3rd day. Our expectations get tickled again when Mia shows us her sister Riley's childhood drawings, and they happen to be amazing, which you rarely see in horror movies. Mia explains Riley's background in the performing arts allowed her to become an expert at pretending she's okay when she's not okay. And this demonstrates the movie's dialogue is complex and intricate. Because as you will see, as this story progresses, Riley is always on the verge of hysterical crying if she's not already been taken over by hysterical crying.
Riley's YouTube crew of paranormal investigators known as the Paranormal Paranoids not only appear to have made light of the mental health struggles of over 10 million Americans with the choice of their name, rather ironically might have avoided their ultimate dark fate had they collectively behaved even mildly paranoid when it was completely appropriate to do so, but more on that later.
And at 7.5 minutes into the film, we see cold air used as a means of suggesting a spiritual presence, which you rarely see in horror movies. And look, right on cue, there's Riley expertly disguising how upset she is by running down the hall in hysterics. Then we're shown news anchors announcing the disappearance of the paranormal crew in front of green screens, which you rarely see in horror movies.
So Mia tells us the act of going missing is what actually made them famous. And if you're wondering how they were all over the news, if being all over the news is what got them all over the news, I can only offer you the following. This will also serve as your answer later on when you're asking why this movie devotes 0% of its narrative to anybody else in the crew, or Mia's husband, or to the town of Shelby Oaks itself.
After listening to a police officer speak in tiny little eloquent circles about nothing pertaining to the characters or the plot, Mia switches narrative gears with the grace of a person in the midst of a grand mal seizure. And she tells us her and her husband Robert aren't able to conceive children during this documentary about her missing sister. Evidently, they have tried really hard to conceive, but rather surprisingly, Riley's disappearance somehow didn't heat things up in the bedroom.
We're then treated to some hyper-realistic news footage of Riley's crew, the social anxieties, being found dead outside Shelby Oaks in a cabin in the woods, which you rarely see in horror movies. They also find a gigantic bloody symbol painted on the front door, and every team member inside dead, except for Riley, who was missing. And as a side note, you've already seen everything the police would have needed to solve this mystery if they were paying attention.
The police find a video camera at the scene, which you rarely see in found footage horror movies. And on that video camera, they find footage of something outside the window you can't really make out. But whatever it was, we know it must have been terrifying because the police officer makes a traumatized face when he's talking about it 12 years later. And then for reasons best known to Chris Stuckmann himself, Mia reminisces about her mother's genius method of ensuring Riley and Mia would never get lost in the woods behind their house as children. She carved their initials into the trees, which is absolutely genius. Unless you're lost and you can't find those trees, or you happen to be in the forest at night without military-grade tactical night vision goggles.
And this opening segment ends rather abruptly, switching from found footage to a more traditional format, when a mysterious stranger arrives and shoots himself at Mia's front door.
And then at 17 minutes exactly, the film puts its best foot forward as Mike Flannagan's name graces the screen. Flannagan, of course, is responsible for single-handedly creating some of the last decade's greatest horror-centric television and movies. Another 14 names and production entities appear before Chris Stuckmann eventually arrives next to his wife, with whom he shares story credits. This likely implies they have listed the credits in standard descending order, starting with those who put the most work into the project.
And for all the people talking about the unusually excessive amount of time Mia chooses to leave the stranger's blood across her face and her lips, don't get down on yourself for missing out on some of Chris Stuckmann's genius. It happens to the best of us. In fact, some of us haven't been able to find the genius in this film at all.
You might have noticed Mia staring down at the tape in the man's hand for an excessive amount of time. There's a reason for that. When you freeze the frame at 1809 and zoom in tight, things become a bit clearer. I'm sure this was dramatic for you, but I wanted you to know I totally don't have HIV or AIDS or hepatitis C. And as such, I want you to feel free to leave any blood I may have sprayed over you as long as you need to in order to wrap your head around what's just happened. Back in the house, Mia's husband Robert expresses his concerns about the stranger's blood on his wife's cheek and tongue. But after finding out the stranger said he didn't have HIV or AIDS or hepatitis C, Robert relaxed again and popped into the kitchen to make them some ham sandwiches with the crust cut off. As luck would have it, Mia had all of the outdated equipment necessary to play the ancient cassette right next to her abacus and sundial upstairs. So she snuck up to her room and watched the dead man's video in secret. Not surprisingly, the sight of her missing sister proved a difficult and unexpected visual to process, and the resulting tears flowing down her face rehydrated the stranger's 6-hour-old dried blood, spreading much of it into her eyes and across her teeth. But we know half the relief on her face comes from the stranger's reassurance there is no HIV or AIDS or hepatitis C in his blood.
After putting on her trademark super-duper happy face several times in the video, the group sneaks into a cabin they don't own, where they decide to go to sleep. The decision is a baffling one, and ultimately it's never explained, but that just adds to the movie's dark, mysterious tone.
Then the group's utter lack of healthy paranoia gets somebody's head pulled off, possibly, and Riley gets abducted on camera. The abductor's face also ends up clearly on camera, which is fantastic because the movie would have been over if it hadn't. And I'm guessing this is the exact type of thing they paid Mike Flannagan to point out to Chris Stuckmann. Mia decides to share the contents of the video with her impotent husband because they are very close. With his wife's face now glistening with a thick paste-like mixture of crying snot and the stranger's coagulated blood, you might think he'd be keeping his distance.
But it's scientifically established blood is only disgusting when it contains communicable diseases, even if it comes from a stranger. Science. And we all know this blood is as fresh and clean as Sunday morning laundry. Maybe at the Sawyer's house in Round Rock, Texas.
They find a professional headshot of the man somewhere. His name is Wilson Miles, and he spent 5 years in the prison Riley and her team of schizophrenic psychics last investigated. And when the officer we're all taking very seriously, who wasn't able to piece the symbol-based evidence together himself after 12 years, asks Mia if her missing sister has anything to do with the death of Wilson Miles, who doesn't have HIV, AIDS, or hepatitis C, Mia says no way. And back home, when Robert asks why she's withholding evidence from the police, Mia gets very angry at her husband, who's such an ineffectual pushover we can only assume we lack the intelligence to understand Chris Stuckmann's motivation in writing him into the story at all. And she reminds him as soon as the public gets a hold of the video, they will drag Riley through the dirt all over again.
And for anyone confused by this statement, because we've been told Riley was a popular and well-liked person before her abduction, don't get down on yourself for missing out on some of Chris Stuckmann's genius.
You might have noticed Riley scrawling something into a tree in the previous scene, and if you zoom in tight, you'll see what Riley was actually scrawling, and the controversy plaguing her will become clear. I definitely think Taylor's latest album, The Life of a Showgirl, is her worst album by a mile. But when you consider how great everything she's written before it is, how do you even chart her worst album compared to everybody else's best? And after quietly contemplating the potential interpretations of Taylor Swift's father figure lyrics for about 45 minutes, Mia decides the best way to cover the most ground in the least amount of time and the safest, most logical fashion is to ditch her husband and ignore the police and go it alone.
And her journey of discovery and randomly targeted furious outbursts leads her directly to the actor and the man who inspired Chris Stuckmann to beg strangers for even more money, even though he'd already tripled his initial monetary requests, Keith frickin' David, who after all the hype and the hoopla appears in this movie for 120 seconds. And every single one of those seconds is delivered with the exact quantity of enthusiasm this movie deserves.
And he tells Mia things that don't move the plot along or reveal anything about the characters, but it doesn't really matter when he does it because he was in The Thing. Remember him in The Thing? And when Mia tells her husband everything she's learned, her husband obliterates our expectations by telling his wife he doesn't believe her, and instead suggests she needs help. You rarely see that in horror movies. Then she gets help from a book she's had the whole time her sister's been missing. The cover of the book features the exact symbol associated with the death of Riley's group, the post-traumatic stress disorders. And there are drawings inside the book that explain everything that's going on in this movie, which you rarely see in horror movies.
Mia compares the drawings in the book to her sister's childhood drawings, which happen to be Leonardo da Vinci quality sketches, which you rarely see in horror. I'm trying to make a point.
And right after seeing drawings of a hellhound and explanations of what hellhounds are, you'll never guess what shows up outside Mia's house. Oh, you did guess. It was a hellhound. But Mia doesn't care about dumb hellhounds because she's chosen to rewatch her sister's video every time she comes back to the house instead of doing it all in one sitting and then acting on what she's seen sequentially and progressively the way things sometimes unfold in movie plots. And on her next excursion, Mia hints at the strength of her marriage while simultaneously suggesting perhaps her and Robert can't have children because their bond is as deep and real as yours is with ChatGPT. She decides to go into the abandoned prison Riley and her crew investigated, except she goes by herself and in the middle of the night. And look, it's no wonder nobody picked up on that symbol. It's so tiny and subtle. The next setting is more evidence Chris Stuckmann has testicles 4 times the size of the national average. After he far surpassed the amount of money he initially begged for, he had the bajingies to beg for more so he could shoot some of the film where they shot Shawshank Redemption.
And on a serious note, for just a second, if you were one of the kind, generous, thoughtful people that gave Chris Stuckmann your money, you might not have recognized a single inch of this highly limited scenery. You can take some comfort in knowing Chris probably got to recognize all of it, because he spent days traipsing around the legendary location like a spoiled kid on a school trip, and you didn't.
And after a run-in with another hellhound and a total lack of redemption at Shawshank, Mia wanders alone into a dark forest in the middle of the night, which you rarely see in horror movies, as she finds the exact tree from her sister's 12-year-old video. And for a bit of unrelated trivia, I was half dozing by this point in the movie, because I tend to snooze when I'm terrified and intrigued. And when I woke up, I was startled at the prospect I was suddenly watching Kamala Harris. And then, one of the hellhounds makes another appearance and guides Mia towards a cabin. And if you're confused by the nature of these hellhounds and who exactly they're serving, I am too.
Outside the cabin, the garden is full of twigs in the shape of the symbol associated with the death of Riley's crew. And you never really see that sort of thing in found footage horror. Now, if any of the police officers or Mia or any of the millions of online ravenous fans would have just connected the symbols at any point over the last 12 years, just once, just one time.
And that's when Mia meets Norma, played by Robin Bartlett, who is actually a brilliant actress who's been in a lot of great movies. You might remember her cameo from Shutter Island. She is exempt from my quips because she's a lovely lady and we like her. Norma invites Mia into the cabin.
Because Chris Stuckmann forced her to.
We can tell she's a witch immediately because her cabin is humongous inside without a single support beam anywhere, and that means she must be holding up the roof with magic. Mia pokes around while Norma's away getting her a cracker for dinner, and that's not a joke. And while she's gone, Mia discovers Norma is Miles's mother and that Miles kidnapped Riley. We in the audience already knew all this, but Mike Flannagan probably suspected a lot of people doze off when they're terrified and intrigued the way I do, so he had the information repeated.
And as a faithful servant of Tyrion, the incubus, Norma forced Miles to impregnate Riley. But it took him 12 years to pull it off. And maybe, if Miles hadn't blown his brains out, and if Robert wasn't just about to blow his brains out, the two of them could have got together at the weekend and commiserated about pushing a car up a hill with a rope. Now, I don't do sponsorships, but if I did, there's definitely a joke to be had in here somewhere. It probably wouldn't even be that hard to find. Boners are funny.
When Mia asks where her sister is, Norma just tells her because I told you she's a lovely lady. And after freeing Riley, they all end up upstairs with the baby. And after magicking the fuck out of Mia with the same magic she used to hold the roof up, Norma gives her life performing a blood ritual over top of the newborn.
Because Chris Stuckmann forced her to.
Then the police arrive, which you rarely see in horror movies. And after spending an afternoon in the hospital, a TV crew films Riley in her bed on her first day home after the mind-bending, supernatural, future-fucking 12-year-old long ordeal.
You can't blame the film crew. Somebody had to let them in. Somebody had to give them permission. That had to be Mia, who supposedly spent the last 12 years trying to track down her sister without ever leaving her house from the looks of it, just to throw her in front of cameras the day she got home. I'm reacting to this movie after a single viewing, and I always watch them at least twice. So obviously I have missed Mia's motivation for whoring out her concubine sister to the first TV crew that knocked on the door.
While Mia is outside getting her money from the MTV Cribs crew, Riley tries smothering the baby because Chris Stuckmann loved Rosemary's Baby and figured nobody else had ever watched the movie. And during the ensuing scuffle between the sisters, Maya kung fu's Riley right out the window. And that would have been the end of the movie if it weren't for the fact Chris was given even more money to film a final scene. And with that money, Chris's well-honed, dialed-in filmmaking gut instincts told him this movie really needed a pack of hellhounds to materialize out of nowhere and attack and kill Riley, which you rarely see in horror. Which you never see. You definitely. I've never seen. Oh my God! I gave myself hiccups. The final shot features Tyrion, the incubus, grabbing Mia's shoulder. And if you squint so hard your eyes start bleeding just a bit, you might be able to connect Mia's baby woes to this final situation, as I am guessing Chris Stuckmann is trying to suggest. The movie ends with Mia reacting with an impersonation of the legendary Dee Wallace at the end of the second greatest werewolf movie ever made. Don't you dare ask me what the first is.
After finally solving the 12-year-old mystery of her sister Riley, and then tossing her sister Riley through a window like a dirty blonde chew toy to be gnawed on by a pack of ravenous dogs, the real mystery of this movie will never actually be solved. For all the time it took to make this movie and all of the extra money required to fix things and all of the outside assistance from actual industry professionals who know what they're doing, and after whatever may or may not have actually transpired with Sydney Sweeney, we'll never know what this movie would have been like if it was actually made by Chris Stuckmann. If you just consider Neon threw in about $1 million for reshoots on a movie worth about $1 million, I for one would pay a tremendous amount of money to get my hands on that original copy, although I suspect it's already been thrown out a window and eaten by dogs. One thing we do know for sure is he stopped reviewing movies he didn't like when it occurred to him he might end up offending one of his new potential Hollywood friends. And on that note, as far as I can tell, he never ended up reviewing his own film. And I'm going to let you decide what that might suggest about Chris Stuckmann's own feelings about Shelby Oaks. And until next time, folks.